When brute force style of play meets creativity. It's another episode of the series Battle of the Titans between Lila Chess Zero and Stockfish. And as of this time, Stockfish is still crowned the king of chess engines, and Stockfish is widely known for its deep calculation and deep evaluation. It can evaluate millions of moves per second. It's that good. And its opponent is also known as the otherworldly or alien like chess computer. It uses the unconventional way of calculating and evaluating positions. It values more on pieces activity and space advantages. Now, let's not talk about how good they are and let's just watch the game. Stockfish is playing white this time and Lila is playing black, and white opens up with 1d4 and black respond with knight f6, and the game continue with c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6, and f3. And the black king castle short, and we have the king's Indian defense on the board. Now if white continue to develop its bishop to e3, then we have the same-ish variation of the KID. And the game continue with bishop g5. I forgot the name of the variation. It sounds like German something, but anyway, let's continue. Knight c6, knight e2, a6, queen d2, bishop d7, pawn h4, and black blocks the advance of the h pawn by pushing its own to h5. White castles long, knight a5, knight f4, knight moves back to c6, and white further advance on the king's side, breaking up the black's position by pushing its pawn to g4, challenging the pawn on h5. Pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, knight moves back to h7, attacking the bishop on g5, and knight is making an outpost on d5. Rook e8, bishop challenges the defensive bishop on g7, pawn push to e5, bishop takes bishop, king takes bishop, pawn takes pawn, and the black knight captured the pawn on e5. Pawn advance to g5, c6, attacking the knight on d5. Knight has to move back, queen e7, bishop e2, rook prepares the advance of the b pawn by playing rook b8, rook d to f1, pawn advance to b5, king moves to b1, pawn further advance attacking the knight, knight moves down, a5 protecting the pawn on b4, rook g1, a4, and white also attacks the black position by playing its own h5. Bishop attacks the rook on f1, rook moves up to f2, king moves down to g8, rook attacks the bishop on h3, bishop moves back to d7, and rook doubles up and creating a cannon on the G file. Bishop attacks the pawn on C4, rook H1, king moves up to G7, knight develops to F2, and the pawn advances to A3, challenging the pawn on B2, and white replies by pushing the pawn to B3. Knight takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, black rook challenges the rook on the H file, rook captures rook, king takes rook, pawn takes pawn, and knight G takes pawn. Knight D3, knight takes knight, bishop takes knight, and the black rook challenges the rook on the G file, which the white rook decline and give a check to H2. King moves up to G7, and the white queen munches the pawn on B4. Queen protects the pawn on A3, and white further advances its central pawn to E5, leaving the knight on E3 unattended, and it's hanging. So black continued to play by playing king F8. Now let's go back for a second. Let's see if ever, or if in case, the queen captures the knight on E3. Just an example. Let's have a look and let's try the variation. If the queen captures the knight on E3, then white can now give the check by playing rook H7, and there's no other square that the king can move to except the F8 square, and white can continue the attack by playing queen B8 check. And in this position, let's say for example, if the king doesn't move to E7 square, let's say the bishop covers the check, then the queen can just capture the bishop. Therefore, it will lead to black's material loss. And let's say if the knight covers the check, then the queen can capture the knight and it's a checkmate. Therefore, it's not possible. So the king has to move to E7. And in this position, the rook is hanging on G8. So let's say, for example, if the queen captures the rook on G8, then this bishop on D3 is also hanging, and it can be captured by the black queen. And this will lead to a draw because the king is now open and can be subject to a perpetual check. Therefore, white must not capture the rook on G8 if the king moves to E7. Therefore, the correct continuation will be queen takes pawn on D6 with a check, and if the king moves down, then the queen can now capture the bishop with a check. And again, if the king moves, of course, because it's a check, it's a forcing move, so queen can check again the king. And if the king moves to C8, then the queen can capture the pawn on C6. And if the king moves to B8, then the queen can check the king on B5. And then if the king moves to A8, then the queen can now check the king at or on the D5 square. preparing to capture the knight on f7. Now, in this position, if this will happen in the game, then black can just resign. But it did not happen because the continuation should be like black moves the king to f8 instead of capturing the knight. Now the game continue with king c2. Then black played rook g3. Now again, let's say for example, if black did not move the rook to g3 and instead captured the knight on e3 instead, because it's still hanging, it didn't move. So let's say for example, we'll give another variation or a sideline to this, and let's have a look what will happen if the queen will capture the knight on e3. Now if the queen captures the knight on e3, then the queen can give the check to b8, and then again the king can move to e7, and pawn takes pawn, check, knight takes pawn, queen c7, check, and if the bishop covers, then rook e2 wins the game. Therefore, the knight on e3 cannot be captured because it's quite dangerous. So the game continues with black playing rook g3 instead. So pawn takes pawn, rook takes knight this time, and rook h8 check, king g7, queen c3 check, rook covers, and Stockfish sacrifice the queen by taking the rook on e5 with a check. Knight captures the queen, and rook h7 check, restoring the material advantage. Pawn move forward to c5, bishop e4, knight f7. Stockfish again sacrifice the rook for the knight with a check. Bishop captures the rook, and Stockfish again sacrifice the bishop. Now this bishop cannot be taken because if the king moves the 6th rank, then this pawn will just advance and it cannot be stopped. Therefore, instead Leela played bishop g8. Now pawn advanced to d7, king protects, and king moves up to c3, bishop f7, pawn attacks the c5 square, pawn takes pawn, king takes pawn, and king moves down to the promotion square. King moves up, king c7, and Stockfish sacrificed the pawn. This is already a winning position anyway, so yeah, Stockfish just left the pawn on d7 unattended, and the king can just capture it if he likes, but it didn't. Leela did not capture it, so bishop d5, attacking the bishop. Now bishop moves away to g6, and king moves up to d6. bishop attacks the the bishop on d5. Now, the bishop here cannot be captured because it will be a draw. So if white blunder and capture the bishop on e4, then it's a draw because the king has no more square to move. So this, and this pawn is already fixed. Therefore, the bishop cannot be captured. And the game continue with bishop e6, and Lila just sacrificed the bishop to c6, and Lila resigned in this position. So hinaot nga doon na kita nakatunan ni nga dula, and that's the end of it. And I hope to those who are watching and to those who are still learning, and I hope you enjoyed the game. Di nilang tataman hantod sa sunod.